After a long break, Search for Kusoge returns with another unlucky project involving wolves. It did gather a nice sum of Kickstarter money, but things didn't turn out ideal. The Steam users 59% positive and Metacritic's 55 average promise a more mediocre experience. But let's see if I agree with the general consensus as we dive into the grim fantasy world of Woolfe, the Red Hood Diaries.
This action platformer that I think is close enough to be defined as 2.5D was released in 2015 and seems to be the first video game fork for many of its team members, including to what I concluded to be its main creatives David Penas and Jasmine van de Verve, who both had a hand in writing while the former also did animation. Like with an earlier game I've reviewed, Dark Matter, this dark reimagining of Little Red Riding Hood fairy tale was intended to be the first part of a larger story, though with only 2 parts, but due to poor sales and alleged mismanagement, that second part never materialized. Now, however, it is time for our grim leading Lady Red, played by Michelle Sparks, who expositions that the once thriving city of Ulrika has been ravaged by its greedy and cold-hearted emperor of sorts, B.B. Woolfe. Haha, get it? Who she suspects to have arranged her inventor father's death 4 years ago, and she has returned with vengeance as her fuel!
Aw, come on! That's not very pedestrian-friendly.
Indeed, Red is not a full brooding Batman type, as she can also throw constant humorous commentary like cheap batarangs. On paper, I don't have anything against balancing drama with comedy, but in her case, I think it's out of character for her, at least the style. It should be more on the dry side and certainly not as frequent. But the drama writing also doesn't know what it's doing because she can suddenly start rhyming without any warning.
The truth behind my father's death was buried along with his body. Lips were sealed and the case was closed, but not for me. I had already lost a parent. This simply couldn't be. For weeks I cried. For months I couldn't speak. Until finally, I was done feeling so broken and weak.
It feels like a compromise solution between 2 writers to appease both of their creative wants, but with the consequence of making it jarring for the audience.
Most of the introducing of lore and plot-relevant elements are either done via Red's inner exposition monologues that are delivered adequately steadily albeit monotonously, or collectible tidbits that I guess nicely build the world but also feel static when pretty much everything is told and not shown. This is partly due to necessity because the citywide curfew with only clockwork soldiers patrolling the streets has removed all the non-player characters from the streets. Yeah, not a single friendly face in sight, and even the non-friendly faces never utter a single word, including Wolfe's creepy minion Pied Piper and Woolfe himself. Because I heard it works so well for Paper Mario Sticker Star.
So there are a few lines from Red's grandmother played by Barbara Goodson under the alias Janice Carroll, but that character only appears at the very climax. There has to be a lot of cut content because this kind of story solution feels too bizarre to come up naturally. Not that the rest of the story is anything that supreme either. There are interesting elements, but thanks to Tell Don't Show, they're not well implemented and are sometimes contradictory.
Also, the general presentation does a lukewarm job in supporting the atmosphere. Character models are alright enough designed, and the environments are that to an extent as well, but they have a washed out color scheme that makes them feel samey. Well, the later Broken Forest stage has more visual flair, though it is hindered by its trial and error level design. Sound isn't any better as effects often lack punch, and music is self-repeating.
At this point I would say something like, maybe the gameplay can save it. But I don't think I have to, because, well, you have no doubt seen how clumsy the turning has been. Though I can't say for certain if using a controller instead of keyboard would help in that. because I recorded this gameplay footage like over a year ago, so I have forgotten the initial feeling. But what I can say based on the material that it affects to anything from traversing to combat.
The control system is best suited for sneaking portions that Red must do whenever there are electrified tin soldiers marching around because the character is not triggered to make sudden turns. Soon though she randomly finds an axe from city archives to use as a weapon, and equally randomly she gets new powers like area attack and throwing with the justification of didn't know I know that. These require magic energy, though fallen enemies drop enough of the stuff for it to not to be a huge problem, so many battles can be won with blind smashing, provided the groups are relatively small. With bigger groups, surviving requires frantically jumping around, which make me wish for a block move, though that wouldn't have help against the first boss Pied Piper, who has an army of rats and insta-kill musical attacks. Basically anything that requires speed or quick decision amplifies the feeling of clunky controls, and I'm still surprised I managed to do this chase sequence on my first try. At least the game doesn't overstay its visit, as it can be finished in 2.5 hours.
And it's probably pointless to mention that this whole experience ends on a cliffhanger. I think only Journey took me less time to complete, but whereas that game can justify its short length by being a tight emotional package, Woolfe, the Red Hood Diaries, can't.
Overall it feels like the developers had bitten more than they could chew, so they had to make the experience too short for its own good. Story is rushed and statically told, writing doesn't have a cohesive style or tone, and controlling everything is clumsy when things get hectic. The latter point does make me think that this would work better as a stealth game, and its platforming isn't anything too unbearable. That is, until that floating forest stage where distances and what to land on are harder to deduct. I guess if you want dark fairy tale action, those Alice games are probably a better option. So far Mr. Penas hasn't done any other designing and has focused on art and visual effects for such virtual reality games as Horizon VR, Call of the Mountain and Metro Awakening, and Miss Van de Verve also has been involved in the world of VR with arting and writing for Pollinator Park. As for the next part in the adventures of the Red Hood, I have a feeling everyone involved will prefer to move on.
As for this game, to the bottom 100 it goes, which means release for the Blackwell Unbound. Yeah, the second part in the generally liked urban fantasy point-and-click quintology, well, I don't remember much of it, but I think the puzzles were the least stellar in the series, and the bickering between two protagonists was too much for it to be enjoyable. I guess I should look up that Archie Red Riding Hood adaptation, The Path. At least that's supposed to be deep.
Okay, so you guys keep on doing that and pretend I'm not here.